Going from green to a much sparklier gold, the forces of the Custodes are next on our hit list for a best units video, and as before we're going to be taking a look at 5 units which, in no particular order, are very much worth considering when you are putting together a Custodes list that may just be a little bit spicier and a little bit more competitive than what you may usually go for. Custodes are actually doing really well at the moment in 10th edition. This past weekend they came in both first and second place at Tacoma with actually relatively different lists, so we may see a few of those units that were in those lists in this video too. But without any more time wasting, let's dive into it and see what some of the best Custodes units are in 10th edition. It's also worth noting, of course, that the Custodes do have a lot of Forge World kits, and this list will include and be looking at those too. It won't just be the old plastic Codex kits, because that is still a relatively limited selection in my opinion, and some of the Forge World units are just really good at the moment for the Custodes. But first up, we have a staple solid battle line choice, the Custode Guard. These are a hefty 45 points per model, so they aren't cheap, but they do get one of the best battle line infantry stat lines in the entire game, as you would expect from a Custodian. They are toughness 6 with 3 wounds, a 2-up save and a 4-up invuln, so they are really difficult to get rid of, and it's made even stronger thanks to their detachment 4-up feel no pain against mortal wounds, so pretty much anything that your opponent throws at you, whether it's regular fire or mortal wound firepower or devastating wound kind of attacks, they will still get a solid save at, and it will be really hard for your opponent to actually kill any of them. They get to reroll wound rolls of 1 or all wound rolls near an objective, and also once per battle they can shoot twice in the shooting phase, so they also have some incredibly strong damage output too. And I mean, their guns aren't amazing, they're essentially slightly better bolt rifles with damage 2, but firing twice with a squad of 10, whilst expensive, that could mean 42 damage shots going out, which with their rerolls will pretty much wipe out an entire 10-man intercessor squad, which isn't bad going for one shooting phase. In melee, of course, they are even more terrifying. That's where Custodes belong. Their spear is strength 7, minus 2 AP and 2 damage, or they can take the Sentinel Blade, which is slightly weaker. It's only strength 6 and only 1 damage, but again, with those rerolls, they can do a serious number. Chucking out 50 attacks from a full 10-man squad will just chew through pretty much any enemy that gets too close to them. They can also take the shields with the Sentinel Blades for an extra wound, which does put them at 4 wounds each, so that is incredibly strong and gives them just an extra bit of survivability, not only against 1 damage weaponry, but also against 3 damage weaponry. It's going to take an extra wound to actually kill one, so that's a really strong option to put a few in the squad for, just to soak those kind of attacks. And then they also have the option for a Vexilla to add an extra OC to them, so they are just a really customizable squad. They can do incredible damage output in melee, they can do decent damage at range, and they are really survivable. They will just murder absolutely anything in combat, and then you can just plonk them on an objective and essentially dare your enemy to try and take it back from you, and with that durability, they're probably gonna fail. So yes, just all round a super strong, super durable, expensive, yes, but very worthwhile unit for a Custodian list in my opinion. Much like the Guard, the Wardens are also a fantastically strong infantry choice. They have the same stat line and spear option, but now they also have the Castellan Axe as a weapon pick, which brings them a strength 9, minus 1 AP, 3 damage weapon. It does only hit on 3s rather than 2s, and minus 1 AP is a bit of a roadblock, I won't lie. I think in general the spear is probably going to be better most of the time. It's got more attacks, it's got more AP, and it hits better, but if you know you're going up against 3 wound infantry or a load of toughness 8 or toughness 9 targets, the axe could be worth considering just to get that insta-killing 3 damage or that slightly easier wound rolls on them. The Wardens are 50 points each, so they are 5 more than a Custodian Guard, but they are still, in my opinion, very worth taking because they do unbelievably well as character bodyguards. Their Resolute Will rule means that if a leader is with the unit, any attacks that are higher than their toughness, so any strength 7 or above attacks, get -1 to their wound roll, essentially meaning that these guys will never be wounded on 2s, and most things will be wounding on 4s at best, which does add a huge amount of durability to the unit and the attached character, and they will be safer for much longer, even against high strength precision shots. On top of that, they also get their once per game ability, which is Living Fortress, and this for a phase gives them a ridiculously strong 4-up Feel No Pain. So if your unit gets charged by, say, Angron, or is about to get shot by a Wraith Knight with heavy Wraith Cannons, you pop this at the start of the phase, and now your unit will be sitting comfortably not only on their 4-up Invuln, but also a 4-up Feel No Pain to keep them safe, and this as well as the -1 to wound from Resolute Will. It means that even the scariest units in the game, like Angron, will actually struggle to kill more than 1 or 2 from your squad, and then you can just hit back into them in your swing and just wipe the enemy unit out of existence. So Wardens are a really key unit as a character bodyguard, and if you are bringing 1 or 2 characters in your list or leaders in your list, then at least 1 squad of Wardens I think is well worth taking, just so that that leader unit is alive and buffing your squad for as long as humanly possible. On the subject of leaders joining units, the next one on the list is one of my favourite characters the Custodes have. This is brand new from 9th edition, and it's the Blade Champion. The Blade Champion is a flat 100 points, which is actually I think quite cheap for his stat line and his rules. He's toughness 6 with 6 wounds, a 2-up save, and of course the 4-up Invuln, so he is plenty durable even before he's joined a squad. But when he does join a unit, his usefulness just goes through the roof. He gives his unit reroll advance and charge rolls, which is already a super strong ability for a melee heavy army that wants to get into combat as soon as possible, but on top of that, once per game he can, with his martial inspiration rule, give a unit advance and charge. So you can move up your 6-inch move, roll an advance, which you can reroll if you want, and then still charge again with a reroll if you need it. So you are much more likely to get into combat with him and his squad, or you can potentially risk that slightly higher long bomb charge to get into combat with a key enemy unit, and making that once per game charge into the right squad, getting say your big squad of Wardens and the Blade Champion into melee and destroying that key enemy unit is so strong and can potentially be a game-winning move. So this buff alone is super powerful, and I would say it almost makes the Blade Champion worth bringing alone just for this rule, let alone his own melee output. But of course his melee output is really worth considering because it is really good as well. He can choose one of 3 profiles to attack with. Behemoth is your anti-character, strength 7, -2 AP, 2 damage profile with precision. Hurricanus is your anti-horde, you get sustained hits and 9 attacks baseline on it. And then Victus is sort of your anti-elite, I guess. It's only strength 6, so it's not great into vehicles, but it is 3 damage and has devastating wounds, so you can do some solid work into pretty much any enemy that you want to put this into. Rolling those devastating wounds can get you some good mortal wounds, which is obviously good against hordes or elites or vehicles. So that's a bit more of sort of an all-rounder one, I think. And he does of course stack all this with the martial Qatar system, so you can get lethal hits or sustained hits 1 on his Victus or Behemoth profile as well, for instance. So he is just incredibly good at killing stuff. Like all by himself, he is super strong at just killing stuff. But then on top of that, he brings that very powerful mobility and utility buff to his unit. And then the final cherry on top for him is that him and his unit can also be targeted with the Heroic Intervention strat for 0 CP, which is again really powerful and can help him and his unit get into combat with a cheeky charge when your opponent may not be expecting it. So just all round, yeah, the Blade Champ is really solid for his points, and if you have a unit that you want to get into melee, which you do as Custodes most of the time, I would be bringing him in my list every single time just for that buff to get them into combat as soon as possible. Up next we have our first Forge World unit, the Caladius Grav Tank. This is 215 points, and you do actually get quite a lot for this investment. It's toughness 11, it has 14 wounds, and a 2-up save with a 5-up invuln, so it is really rather durable against enemy shooting, and even things like las cannons are going to have a fairly tough time taking it down with any kind of speed or reliability. And then on the output front, it has the main guns of either the Arachnus Heavy Blaze Cannon or the Iliastus Accelerator Cannon. The Arachnus is 4 twin linked shots at strength 12, minus 3 AP and d6 plus 2 damage, whilst the Iliastus is 4 shots, again twin linked, but this is also rapid fire 4, so it can be up to 8 shots within 24 inches, and these are strength 10, minus 1 AP and 3 damage. So the Iliastus is less strength, it's less AP and less damage, but it is potentially double the number of shots. And then on top of that, the Caladius has a rule which buffs each type of gun, so if you take the Arachnus, you get lethal hits against monsters and vehicles, which fits the anti-armor profile of the gun, whilst the more anti-infantry focused Iliastus gets lethal hits against anything that is not a monster or a vehicle. So both are very, very good at what they do, it just depends on what you need in your list more. I'd say most of the time the Arachnus is going to be more useful because it brings that much needed long range anti-tank firepower to the Custodes, which they do sometimes lack in other places. Like anti-infantry isn't really a big issue for Custodes just because they have loads of attacks and they're very good attacks. But if you do need some more anti-infantry, or you know you're going up against, a horde of Orc boys or a Tyrannid horde, then the Iliastus will net you a good chunk of extra shots that will be hitting and wounding most things on 2s, and then still be very good into more elite infantry like Terminators and Wraithguard thanks to that flat 3 damage too. So I think either option is very good, and in general if you're going against a sort of all-comer army or competition or tournament that you don't know what you're going up against, the Arachnus is probably the safer bet. But if you can sort of be aware of what you're going up against beforehand, you may want to take the Iliastus just to give you that extra anti-infantry firepower if you need it. And then finally we have the last unit in this Custodes list, and this is one of the Sisters of Silence units, the Prosecutors. Now I think this is slightly flexible because you could argue for Witch Seekers or even Vigilators in some situations, but for me, what I'm looking at, the Prosecutors win out just because they're the cheapest. 50 points gets you a squad of 5 of these girls, and I mean they're nothing amazing statline wise, they're toughness 3 with a 3-up save and 1 wound, and they only have a bolt gun, so they aren't exactly scary, but like the Orc Gretchen from the Orc video, these are just cheap, and they are very, very solid backfield objective holders. That's it. They're nice, simple, cheap, and you know exactly what they're going to be doing all game long, which is scoring you points. They do have some nice tricks in that they get a 3-up Feel No Pain against psychic attacks, so they are slightly more resistant against enemy psychers, and they can also potentially do some damage with their Purity of Execution rule, which gives them precision and devastating wounds on their shooting against psychers. So although the bolters aren't scary really, you can in some cases cause your opponent a bit of worry if they've got a Farseer or a Weird Boy or an Astra Militarum Primaris Psyker that's in a unit. Your sisters will be able to target them out in a squad and potentially chuck a few mortal wounds into them, so they aren't totally useless if your opponent has some psychers. But of course the main reason you bring them is for keeping a couple of very cheap, for their cost relatively durable bodies that can sit on an objective and just keep it yours as the rest of your custodian guards go off and kill your opponent on the other side of the board. They are just objective holders, and they are cheap, which for a Custodes list is exactly what you want to be scoring those primary points as the game goes on. So that is it for the Custodes. As I said, they are doing very, very well at the moment. They are kind of winning or doing at least sort of 2nd or 3rd place in a lot of competitions and tournaments. But I think all of the units that we've covered today are at least worth considering when you're building a list for them. And I think some of them are almost must-take options. I think the Blade Champion, the Sisters, arguably the Caladius are all almost mandatory picks for having a really strong list that gives you some great mobility and melee capacity in the Blade Champion, some great long-range firepower from the Caladius, and just cheap, reliable objective holders from the Sisters. But as always, I'd love to know what you think of this list and what you think the strongest Custodes units are in 10th edition so far. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.